The evening air in our living room had always felt like a blanket, a familiar comfort woven from years of family dinners and quiet evenings. But that night, it turned to ice. I was on the staircase, my hand frozen on the banister, when my father's voice cut through the house like a blade, sharp and final, leaving no room for argument. "Dad, please don't come to the wedding. It's better if you stay home." The words hung in the air, a toxic fog that seeped into every corner of the room. I stopped breathing, my body turning to stone as I listened to the conversation I was never meant to hear. Downstairs, in his worn, favorite armchair, the one with the sagging springs that he refused to let anyone fix, my grandfather, a man of 78 years with hands that had built airplanes and a heart that had loved too deeply, slumped forward. It was the kind of collapse that happens when the soul gets punched, not the body. He looked like a marionette whose strings had been suddenly, cruelly cut. "But it's my grandson's wedding." My grandfather's voice came out as a tremor, so quiet it was almost lost in the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. It was the voice of a man who was already learning to make himself smaller, to take up less space in a world that kept telling him he was in the way. "Exactly." My mother's interjection was a crisp, surgical incision. She didn't yell. She didn't need to. Her voice was polished, refined, and utterly devoid of warmth. "And we don't want you embarrassing us in front of Emily's family. The Carsons are people of standing. Do you understand?" "I'm your father," the old man roared, a sudden, desperate burst of fire from a dying ember. "And I'm trying to build a legacy for my children. I can't have you making us look bad," my father shot back, his own voice rising to meet the challenge, to stamp it out. "You'll stay home." End of discussion. If you're watching this or listening, I want you to hit subscribe right now. And in the comments, tell me where you're from. Tell me if you've ever had a moment like this, a moment that cracked your world open. Because what happened next didn't just change our family. It detonated it. It turned everything we thought we knew about ourselves into dust. And I guarantee you won't believe the shape of what grew from the rubble. My name is Clara. I'm 29 years old, a freelance writer living in a small, rain-slicked city in the Pacific Northwest. I write about forgotten things, abandoned buildings, old recipes, the stories people leave behind. But the story that would come to define me started 3 weeks before my brother's wedding. My brother, Mark, was 26, working in marketing, and he was about to marry Emily Carson. Emily was the daughter of one of the most prominent attorneys in the city, a man whose name was etched on the side of a glass tower downtown. Theirs was a world of country clubs, charity galas, and the kind of wealth that doesn't talk about money, it just assumes it. But to understand why my parents could say such cruel things to an old man who had given them everything, you have to understand the architecture of our family. My father, Robert, owned a real estate development company. It was a modest operation, but in his mind, it was the foundation of an empire. He was constantly reminding us that he had built everything with his own 2 hands. He was proud of his success, and his pride was a brittle, fragile thing, always on the verge of cracking. The truth that was buried so deep no one was allowed to speak of it, was that 15 years ago, my father had been drowning. A project had failed, the banks were circling, and he was facing a kind of ruin that went beyond money. It was the ruin of his carefully constructed identity. In that moment of desperation, his father, my grandfather, had stepped in. Grandpa Arthur had mortgaged his small, tidy house, the only asset he had after a lifetime working as an electronics technician for a defense contractor, to lend my father $15,000. For a retired man living on a fixed Social Security check, it wasn't just a loan. It was everything. It was his security, his future, his very life savings, all handed over to save a son who couldn't bring himself to say thank you. Because for my father, it wasn't enough. It was never enough. I remember standing behind my bedroom door at 14, tears streaming down my face as I heard my father scream at his own father. $15,000? Other people lend their kids hundreds of thousands. You're the worst father a man could have. I could picture Grandpa Arthur standing in the hallway, trembling, his lips moving but no sound coming out. He looked like a man who had been struck dumb by the cruelty of the world, a man who had just realized that his entire life's work was worth less than a footnote in his son's ledger. And my mother, Margaret, she had her own grievances. She believed, with a fierce, irrational certainty, that Grandpa favored me over Mark. The reality was painfully simple. I was the only one in the family who cared. Every week, twice a week, I would drive across town to his little house in the working-class neighborhood of Hawthorne. I'd bring him the foods he loved, a specific brand of honey ham, a jar of sweet pickles, a loaf of sourdough from the bakery he'd been going to since the 60s. I would sit on his faded plaid couch and listen to his stories for hours. Stories about his 35 years working on the assembly line, about the pride he felt watching the planes he helped build take to the sky. He told me about my grandmother, a woman with a laugh like wind chimes, who died of cancer when I was too young to remember her face. He told me about the dance halls of his youth, about the war, about the simple, unshakable joy of a well-made thing. Mark, my brother, never came. He only called Grandpa when he needed someone to dog-sit his golden retriever or when he was short on cash for a night out with friends. In my mother's eyes, Grandpa's affection for me was a betrayal. Every birthday, when Grandpa would give me a gift, an old, leather-bound book from his shelf, a hand-knitted scarf in a color he remembered me liking as a child, my mother would grumble. "Why doesn't your father give Mark something like that?" She'd hiss at my father, as if it were a strategic oversight. I tried to explain countless times. "Mom, Mark never calls him. He never visits. How is Grandpa supposed to know what to give him?" No one listened. To them, love was a transaction, a commodity to be measured and weighed and found wanting. Then came the wedding preparations. It was an elaborate affair, a three-ring circus of catering, meetings, and floral arrangements, all culminating in a reception for over 200 guests at the city's most opulent hotel. The tables were $150 a plate. The invitations were embossed with gold foil. The Carson family was powerful, her father a senior partner at the city's biggest law firm, her mother a tenured professor at the state university. They were the kind of people my parents had spent their entire lives trying to impress, trying to become. And Grandpa Arthur? He was a liability, a burden, an embarrassment that didn't fit into the glossy, airbrushed portrait they were trying to paint. 3 weeks before the wedding, the tension in our house became a physical presence, a pressure that made the air hard to breathe. I walked in one evening to find my mother and Mark hunched over a seating chart, their voices low and conspiratorial. "We can't have him at the main family table," my mother was saying, her pen tapping a steady, nervous rhythm against the paper. "He won't know how to behave around people like the Carsons." "What are you saying?" I couldn't believe my ears. The words felt like a physical blow. "Grandpa is Mark's grandfather. Clara, you don't understand the social dynamics here." Mark didn't even look up from the chart. His voice had taken on the same arrogant, dismissive tone as our parents. He was learning from the best. "Emily's parents are going to be judging us on everything. Grandpa Arthur in that ratty suit from the 90s? How is that going to make us look?" I stared at my brother, and for a moment, I didn't recognize him. He was a stranger wearing Mark's face. "Mark, that's Grandpa. He mortgaged his house to help Dad when he went bankrupt." He finally looked up, his eyes flat and indifferent. "That's between Dad and him. It's got nothing to do with me." My blood began to boil, a slow, simmering rage that I'd been suppressing for years. Before I could speak, my father appeared in the doorway, his presence the silent command. "Clara, go to your room. This is an adult conversation." "I'm 29 years old," I said, my voice shaking. "I have a master's degree. I'm financially independent." But in their eyes, I was still the child. The one who didn't understand business and social standing. The one whose emotional attachments were a weakness to be managed. The following week, I witnessed something that made my stomach turn. My mother was sending out the last of the wedding invitations. I watched her meticulously address envelopes to distant cousins and old business associates. I saw Grandpa's name was missing. When he quietly asked her about it a few days later, she feigned surprise. "Oh, Dad, you live here with us. You don't need a separate invitation. You're just with the family." I knew the truth. They weren't forgetting him. They were erasing him. Slowly, methodically, they were preparing the world for a future where he didn't exist. Then came Thanksgiving, 2 weeks before the wedding. The entire family gathered at my parents' house, a sprawling 4,000 square foot showpiece in the hills that my father had just bought after a successful land deal. The dining table was a masterpiece of holiday excess: a golden brown turkey, a silver tureen of cranberry sauce, mountains of mashed potatoes, and a pumpkin pie that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Grandpa Arthur arrived with a homemade apple pie, the kind Mark had loved since he was a little boy. It was in an old, stained ceramic dish, its crust a little lopsided, the scent of cinnamon and baked apples trailing behind him like a ghost of better times. My mother barely glanced at it. "Just leave it in the kitchen, Dad," she said, her voice a flat dismissal. "We already have enough desserts." I saw Grandpa's face fall. He didn't argue. He just walked into the kitchen, set the pie down on the counter, and stood there for a moment, looking at it. Then he came back and took his seat at the end of the table. Throughout dinner, no one talked to him. The conversation was a whirlwind of wedding logistics, the DJ's playlist, the honeymoon in Maui, the floral centerpieces. Grandpa sat in silence, a forgotten prop at the end of the table, occasionally lifting a forkful of turkey to his mouth, staring down at his plate as if it held the secrets of the universe. I watched him, my heart a heavy stone in my chest. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I leaned over, my voice low so only he could hear. "Grandpa, are you enjoying yourself?" He turned to me, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of the man he used to be in his eyes. He smiled. "My dear granddaughter, I'm very happy. As long as I can see you kids healthy, I'm happy." His voice was so soft, it was barely a whisper. My heart shattered into a million pieces. After dinner, while the rest of the family settled into the den to watch football, I followed Grandpa outside. He stood on the back porch, looking out at the manicured garden, his thin shoulders hunched against the biting Portland wind. He wasn't wearing a coat warm enough for the November chill. "Grandpa, come inside. It's freezing." "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just wanted some fresh air." I stood beside him, the silence between us heavy and full of things neither of us could say. After a long moment, he spoke. "Mark's getting married," he said, his gaze still fixed on the bare branches of the oak tree. "When will my granddaughter get married?" I laughed, a hollow sound. "You know me, Grandpa. Still focused on my career." "I know," he said softly. He turned to look at me, his eyes suddenly serious, filled with a sadness that went beyond words. "But don't be like me, Clara. I spent my whole life working, building things for other people. And now, I have nothing but an old house and memories." There was something in his voice that sent a chill down my spine. A finality. A sense of a door closing. I opened my mouth to ask him what he meant, but before I could form the words, my mother's sharp voice cut through the cold air from inside. "Clara, come help me clean up." I hesitated, my eyes locked on Grandpa's face. But he just gave me a gentle nudge toward the door. "Go on, sweetheart. I'll be fine." It was the last time I spoke with him before the wedding. 1 week before the big day, I was in my home office, trying to focus on an article, when I decided to stop by my parents' house to pick up some old tax documents I'd left in my childhood room. As I pulled into the driveway, I could already hear the raised voices. My father's was the loudest, a booming thunder of authority. "I've made a decision. You're not coming to the wedding." I rushed inside, my heart pounding. The living room was a tableau of cruelty. My father stood in the center, his face red with anger. My mother sat on the sofa, her arms crossed, a look of smug satisfaction on her face. And in his worn armchair, Grandpa Arthur sat hunched over, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. "But, Robert," Grandpa's voice was a threadbare whisper. "No buts," my father shouted. "Do you know who the Carsons are?" Edward Carson is a senior partner at the biggest law firm in the state. His wife, Martha, is a respected professor. They have connections everywhere. He waved a hand dismissively at his father. "And you? You're a retired technician living on Social Security. You're a liability." "I'm your father," Grandpa said, his voice cracking. "And I'm trying to build a legacy for my children. And I can't have you embarrassing me in front of them," my father roared. "You'll stay home. That's final." I burst into the room. You can't do this. My father spun around, his fury now directed at me. This isn't your business, Clara. It is my business. I shouted back, my own voice rising to match his. Grandpa is our family. He mortgaged his house to help you when you went bankrupt. And now you're treating him like this. My mother stood up, her voice a cold, measured weapon. You don't understand anything about business or social standing. Edward Carson could help your father land major contracts. We need to make an impression. By abandoning Grandpa? I was incredulous. By pretending he doesn't exist? Clara, that's enough, my father snapped. Either go home or be quiet. I looked at Grandpa. He was staring at the floor, his hands trembling in his lap. He wasn't defending himself. He wasn't fighting. He had already given up. I walked over to him and knelt down, taking his cold, shaking hands in mine. Grandpa, I won't go to the wedding if they don't let you go. His head snapped up, his eyes wide with alarm. No, sweetheart. You go. Jason is your brother. I don't want you to miss important memories because of me. But Grandpa, I'll be fine, dear, he said, but the way he said it, the hollow certainty in his voice, terrified me. I'll be okay. Before I could say another word, my father had a firm grip on my arm, pulling me toward the door. Go home, Clara. And don't cause any drama on Mark's wedding day. I'm warning you. I left the house in a daze, tears streaming down my face. Guilt weighed on my shoulders like a physical burden. I called my best friend, Rachel, needing to hear a voice of reason. Clara, I know it's hard, she said, her voice sympathetic but cautious. But sometimes you have to pick your battles. Your brother's wedding day isn't the right time to start a war. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was too emotional. Maybe I should just accept it and move on, for the sake of family peace. But I couldn't. The thought of Grandpa sitting alone in that empty house while we all celebrated Mark and Emily's perfect day gnawed at me like a sickness. The night before the wedding, I couldn't sleep. I got in my car and drove across town to Grandpa's house, a small 2-bedroom home in a modest, blue-collar neighborhood. He'd lived there for 40 years. It was the only home I'd ever known him in. The house was dark. All the lights were off. I knocked on the front door, the sound echoing in the quiet street. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. I walked around to the garage. His car was still there. I knew he was home. Maybe he'd gone to bed early. I decided I'd come back in the morning, before the ceremony. I would see him one last time. The next morning, the day of the wedding, the world was a blur of activity. The Sentinel Hotel, with its crystal chandeliers and towering floral arrangements, was a glittering jewel box. I put on my dusty rose bridesmaid dress, applied my makeup with a steady hand, but my heart was a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I tried calling Grandpa all morning, over and over. The phone just rang and rang. No answer. The ceremony was flawless. Emily was a vision in her white gown. Mark smiled his radiant, rehearsed smile. My parents beamed, shaking hands with the Carsons, playing the role of the gracious, welcoming in-laws. Everything was perfect. It was a picture-perfect day. But I couldn't stop thinking about Grandpa. I kept picturing him sitting alone in his kitchen, eating a frozen dinner, staring at the wall. The day his grandson got married, and he was an outcast in his own family. After the ceremony, the reception began. An open bar, a live band, elegant tables draped in white linen. I sat at the family table, surrounded by cousins I barely knew. Everyone was laughing, toasting, celebrating. My father stood up to give a speech, his voice booming with self-satisfaction. Today is the most important day of my son's life. I want to thank everyone for being here. Especially, I want to welcome the Carson family into our own. Mark, my son, has grown into a man I'm incredibly proud of. And Emily, welcome to our family. Everyone applauded. I clapped too, my hands moving mechanically. But all I could think was, what about Grandpa Arthur? The man who sacrificed everything for this family. Where was his place in this legacy? Midway through the reception, my mother suddenly leaned over to Mark. Oh, we haven't gotten Dad's wedding gift yet. Mark frowned. Wedding gift? Yes, my mother said, a calculating glint in her eye. Traditionally, grandparents give gifts to their grandchildren on their wedding day. Your grandfather always does that. Remember when Clara graduated high school? He gave her that vintage watch. Oh, right, Mark said, his face brightened as if he'd just remembered a potential source of income. Grandpa hasn't given me anything. He should have given me cash or something. It's tradition. I stared at them, a cold fury settling into my bones. What are you people saying? My voice was low, but it cut through the noise of the reception. He wasn't allowed to come here, and now you're demanding gifts? Clara, it's tradition, my mother said, her voice a frosty whisper. And stop being dramatic. After the reception, we'll stop by Dad's house to get the gift. You people are absolutely shameless, I said, my voice trembling with rage. But no one heard me. They had already turned back to their champagne and their laughter. The party lasted until 11. As the guests began to file out, my parents, Mark and Emily, decided it was time to make their pilgrimage to Grandpa's house to collect what they were owed. I went along, a knot of anxiety twisting in my stomach. When we pulled up to the house, I knew immediately that something was wrong. The house was dark. But more than that, it felt empty. The garage was open. The car was gone. My father used his spare key to open the front door. He flipped the light switch, and we all froze, our minds struggling to process what we were seeing. The house was empty. Completely, utterly empty. No furniture. No pictures on the walls. No TV. No sofa. The living room, which had been filled for 4 decades with the accumulated artifacts of a life, was a hollow shell. The only things left were a few cardboard boxes stacked in the corner of the kitchen and a single, white envelope on the counter. My mother let out a sharp, horrified shriek. Where did he go? My father walked over to the counter, his movement slow, as if he were in a trance. He picked up the envelope and tore it open. As he read the letter aloud, his voice began to shake. Dear family, by the time you read this, I will be settled in my new home at a senior living community called Willow Creek. I have sold this house and most of my belongings. After much thought, and with Clara's help, I've made arrangements for my future. The proceeds from the sale have been allocated as follows. I have paid for 3 years of care at Willow Creek upfront. I want to ensure I won't be a financial burden to anyone. The remaining $47,000 has been placed into a fund that Clara manages through her work. This money will help elderly people in our community who are struggling with loneliness and a lack of family support. I realize now that I have been a burden to this family. I am grateful for the years we have shared, but I believe it's time for me to step back and allow you all to live your lives without the embarrassment of an old technician who doesn't fit into your social circles. Clara, my dear granddaughter, you have always been the light of my life. Thank you for respecting my decision and helping me find a place where I am valued. Please don't worry about me. The people at Willow Creek are kind, and they treat me with genuine respect. I finally feel like I matter again. I wish Mark and Emily a lifetime of happiness. I'm sorry I couldn't attend the wedding, but I understand. Please do not try to contact me. I have asked my attorney, a man named Harrison Ford at Ford & Associates, to handle any family matters going forward. Take care of yourselves. Arthur Mitchell. The silence that followed was deafening. It was a vacuum, a void where the air itself seemed to have been sucked out of the room. Then my father exploded. He gave the money to some charity fund? His face was purple with rage. That stubborn old man. That was our inheritance. He had no right. My mother's head snapped toward me, her eyes blazing with a fury I had never seen before. Wait, Clara helped him? You knew about this? I opened my mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. You helped him steal from this family? My father roared, stepping toward me, his fists clenched. He didn't steal anything. I finally shouted back, my voice breaking free of the fear that had held it captive. It was his house. His money. And yes, I helped him set up the fund because I actually care about what he wants. $47,000. Mark's voice was a shrill, desperate whine. That could have been my down payment on a house. How could you let him throw it away on some random old people? I looked at them, my father, my mother, my brother, and I felt something shift inside me. The guilt, the fear, the desperate need for their approval, it all turned to ash in my mouth, replaced by a cold, righteous anger that I had never allowed myself to feel before. Is that all you care about? My voice was low, but it carried the weight of a lifetime of suppressed truth. Money? Grandpa just left the house he lived in for 40 years. He felt so lonely and rejected that he had to leave his own home, and all you can think about is money. Clara, you don't understand, my father started. No, I roared, my voice shaking the walls of the empty house. Now you're going to listen to me. For years, Grandpa loved this family. He mortgaged his house to save you when you went bankrupt. He built things for Mark with his own hands when Mark was a little boy. He sat through family dinners, silently enduring your contempt and your abandonment. And today, on his grandson's wedding day, he was banned from coming because you were afraid of being embarrassed by him. My mother tried to interrupt, but I wouldn't let her. You don't know anything about real family. I shouted, tears streaming down my face now, hot and angry. Real family isn't just about sharing blood. Real family is about spending time together. It's about caring for each other unconditionally. Grandpa gave you that. He gave you everything he had. But what did you give him? Shame. You made him feel ashamed to be your father. Emily, the new bride, was standing in the corner, her face pale, her eyes wide with shock. She looked at Mark, who was staring at me, his jaw slack. Maybe we should go, she whispered to him. But I wasn't done. I turned to my brother. And you, Mark? You only called Grandpa when you needed money, or when you needed him to dog it, or when you needed him to fix your laptop. Did you ever ask him about his life? Did you know he worked for 35 years, helping build aircraft that millions of people fly on? Did you know he lost our grandmother to cancer when you were 5 years old? Did you know he raised Dad alone? Mark bristled, his face reddening. Well, you're not perfect either. I'm not perfect, I cut him off. But at least I visited him. At least I was there. I was the only one in this family who was. My father stepped forward, pointing a finger at my face. All right, that's enough, Clara. We'll call this lawyer, Harrison Ford, and demand the old man come back. We're family. We'll have a meeting. No, I screamed, my voice raw. You will not harass him anymore. He made himself clear. He wants boundaries. He wants peace. And I will make sure you respect that. My mother sneered. What are you going to do? I'm going to see him, I said, my voice steady now, cold as ice. I'm going to make sure he's okay. As for you people, I looked at each of them, one by one, letting the weight of my gaze settle on them. You should be ashamed of yourselves. You lost a wonderful man because of your greed and your arrogance. And I hope you have to live with that every single day. I turned and walked out of that empty, hollow house, leaving them standing in the silence and the shock, surrounded by the ghosts of a life they had so carelessly thrown away. The next day, I found Willow Creek Senior Living Community. It was a well-maintained facility in a quiet suburb with manicured gardens and a welcoming entrance that felt more like a bed and breakfast than an institution. When I walked in, I was immediately struck by the atmosphere. It was warm. It was homey. It smelled like fresh bread and lavender, not antiseptic and neglect. The receptionist, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a warm smile, looked up as I approached. Hello, can I help you? I'm here to see Arthur Mitchell, I said, my voice trembling slightly. Her face lit up. Oh, Mr. Arthur. He's probably in the community room. Everyone loves him already. He's such a sweetheart. Let me take you to him. As we walked through the halls, I noticed the details. Residents were chatting in common areas, sitting in comfortable chairs by the fire. A staff member was helping a woman with her knitting, laughing at something she'd said. In a sunroom, a group of elderly people were doing watercolor painting together, a young volunteer sitting among them, offering encouragement. When we reached the community room, I saw Grandpa immediately. He was sitting at a table with 3 other residents, playing cards. A young staff member, a man in his late 20s with a friendly face, was teaching them a new game. Mr. Arthur, you've got that poker face down, the young man was saying, grinning. Nobody can tell what cards you've got. Grandpa chuckled. Actually chuckled. It was a sound I hadn't heard in years, a deep, genuine laugh that came from somewhere warm and alive. Then he looked up and saw me. Clara. His face broke into a smile, a radiant, unguarded smile that made him look 20 years younger. My dear. He stood up and the young man looked over. Mr. Arthur, is this the granddaughter you've been telling us about? The writer. Grandpa nodded, his eyes shining. Marcus, this is my granddaughter, Clara. The one who visits me every week. Marcus extended his hand, his grip warm and firm. It's so nice to meet you, Clara. Mr. Arthur talks about you all the time. He says you're the only one who remembers his birthday. My throat tightened. I blinked back tears. Grandpa turned to his new friends. Everyone, give us a moment, please. An elderly woman with kind eyes and a name tag that read Margaret patted his hand. Of course, Henry. We'll be here when you're ready for the next round. And you're still joining us for movie night tonight, right? Another resident asked. Wouldn't miss it, Margaret, Grandpa said. I watched them walk away, a small group of friends who treated him with a simple, easy respect. When they were gone, I pulled up a chair and sat down next to him. We sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the community room, the soft clatter of cards, the murmur of conversation filling the space between us. You're probably angry with me, he said softly. Angry? I shook my head. No, Grandpa. I'm not angry. I'm heartbroken that it came to this. But I'm not angry. I helped you because I respect your decision. He nodded slowly. You were the only one who listened when I said I'd been thinking about this for months. When I first mentioned Willow Creek to you last summer, you didn't dismiss me. You didn't tell me I was being dramatic. You actually toured the facility with me. You helped me understand the contracts and the finances. I remembered that day. Grandpa had called me, his voice hesitant, almost apologetic. Clara, would you come look at a place with me? I think it might be time. When we arrived at Willow Creek, he'd been nervous, but hopeful. We spent 3 hours there. We met the staff. We toured the rooms. We watched how they interacted with the residents. I saw the way the nurses addressed people by name, asked about their families, their interests. They didn't just see patients. They saw people. The staff here actually care, Clara, Grandpa continued, his voice soft. This morning, a nurse named Lisa brought me coffee. She remembered I take it with 1 sugar and a splash of milk. She remembered that from my first day here. He paused. When's the last time your mother remembered how I take my coffee? Never, I thought. My mother had never bothered to learn. At dinner last night, he went on, people asked me about my life. They really asked. Margaret wanted to know about working at the defense plant. Another resident, Robert, used to work in aviation too. We talked for 2 hours about the old days. He looked around the room, a quiet contentment on his face. And the best part, Clara? Nobody here looks at me like I'm a burden. Nobody sighs when I tell a story. Nobody checks their phone while I'm talking. They actually listen. They actually see me. That was when I fully understood. At Willow Creek, Grandpa wasn't the embarrassing old man in the ratty suit. He was Arthur Mitchell, defense contractor veteran, widower, grandfather, gardener. He was a person with a history, with interests, with value. The fund you're managing, Grandpa said, bringing me back to the present. I wanted to help people like me, elderly folks who feel invisible in their own families. Maybe we can fund programs that bring young volunteers to visit seniors. Maybe we can help pay for activities that bring meaning to their lives. You're good at organizing these things. I'd been running a small nonprofit focused on community storytelling for 2 years. It was a modest operation, but it was mine. And Grandpa had been following my work closely, reading my blog posts, asking me about my projects. He was the only family member who did. I'll make sure every penny makes a difference, I promised. He patted my hand. I know you will, sweetheart. You've always been the best of us. Just then, Marcus returned. Mr. Arthur, sorry to interrupt, but it's almost time for the afternoon concert. The pianist from the university is coming today. You said you didn't want to miss it. A concert? I asked. Grandpa's eyes twinkled. They have live music 3 times a week. Different performers. Students from the university, local musicians. Last week, a jazz quartet came. The week before, a children's choir. It's wonderful. Marcus looked at me. Would you like to stay for it? Family members are always welcome. I'd love to. We walked to the gathering hall, where about 30 residents were settling into comfortable chairs. The atmosphere was cheerful, anticipatory. A young woman was setting up at the grand piano in the corner. Staff members moved through the room, helping residents get comfortable, chatting with them about their day. During the concert, I glanced at Grandpa. His eyes were closed, a peaceful smile on his face, completely absorbed in the music. When was the last time I'd seen him this content? When was the last time I'd seen him at peace? That evening, as I was getting ready to leave, I saw Grandpa in the dining hall. He was laughing with a group of residents, Marcus telling a story that had everyone in stitches. Grandpa looked alive. He looked happy. He looked like a man who had finally found his place. A week later, my parents and Mark tried to arrange a family meeting through Grandpa's attorney, Harrison Ford. Ford was a stern man in his 50s, with a face that had seen too much of human nature to be surprised by any of it. He met them in a conference room at his firm. I was there, but not as a family member. I was there to support Grandpa. Ford began, his voice flat and professional. Mr. Mitchell has asked me to make it clear that he does not want any contact from the family for an indefinite period. He sold his personal property legally. He allocated his funds as he saw fit. Both his care at Willow Creek and his charitable donation were executed according to his wishes and the laws of the state. He has every right to do so. But that was family money, my father objected, his voice tight with suppressed anger. Mr. Mitchell, Ford said, that house was in Mr. Arthur Mitchell's name. He had full ownership. He has the absolute right to sell and allocate the proceeds as he wishes. The charitable contribution was made to a legitimate nonprofit organization managed by your daughter. If you continue to harass Mr. Mitchell, we will file for a restraining order. My mother stood up, her face flushed. That old man is my husband's father. We have the right. You have no rights, ma'am.